reporting today for Fun Robotics Network. I'm Abbas, and with me here today is none other than Team 12808, RevAmped Robotics. They are back at the Multinational Tech Invitational with a complete rebuild of the robot. They are one of the fastest close zone bots in the world right now. I can't wait to jump into how they've achieved a top 5 non-penalty OPR, ranked 3rd at MTI so far. Just so much going on with this robot coming up on Behind the Bot. All right, guys, so first question has to be, of course, why the rebuild? You had one of the fastest spindexers in the world going into the Houston World Championship, but now you've rebuilt completely. What was the single biggest decision that drove that rebuild?
So for all things in FTC, consistency is the most important. So at Worlds, our spindexer was by far not the most consistent thing. We spent a lot of late nights trying to make it work after it broke a lot of times in quals. We made playoffs, but then again, our spindexer had some issues. So we decided for MTI, if we're gonna come here, we're gonna do it well, and we're getting rid of the spindexer.
Awesome.
So for that, we did a complete rebuild. We looked at some of the best close spots, and we decided to try to make the best robot possible.
Yeah, talking timeline here. Did you guys start, when did you start the rebuild?
I believe the first week after Worlds, after Worlds, it was pretty rough because we didn't have the performance we wanted. But after that, we looked at a lot of top teams and we were inspired to make a really good robot. So for the first few weeks, it was about a 1 week of CAD and then another week of waiting for manufacturing to finish up. And then after that, it was a week of build, and then right after that, wiring and programming.
Before we get to our next segment, we'd like to thank the following. Studica Robotics is inspiring teams to build better robots with their new array of FTC team options. Check out their updated bevel gears and Maverick hex shaft motors, Planetary gearbox options, and 6mm hex components and shafts for extreme power transmission. Go to studica.com/robots to learn more and apply for discounts.
Let's jump into the robot right here. I want to start with the intake. You guys have this super awesome full width intake, and you guys are one of the few teams at MTI running that side swipe, the side spike, so often. So let's see, a triple wide intake right now, and then also walk me through some of the biggest factors in maintaining consistency through that side spike motion.
So you can just drive it in right here.
Awesome.
Yeah, so for the side spike intake, what we really found to be consistent is that you would need to have a great bias in your intake. So first off, the reason why we wanted to do side spike is because it would make us a lot more versatile in not just close but also far zone if we ever had to play it, as being able to just slam on the wall and grab balls 3 in a line is super important. So we have a simple vector wheel intake, but where we have a little bit of difference from other teams is with our optics here. So we have 3 different types of optics. We have these black optics, which some of them are kind of gone right now, but these ones are pretty rigid. And then these white ones here are a lot more they're a lot more flexible. So what we have here also are these 2 wedges. So they're made in a way that we're able to, basically you need one ball to come in before the other ball, right? So we have this one take the least amount of horizontal path. So this ball has to only be pushed away just a little bit. Mm-hmm. So that's how we do our bias. It's just with the noodles and a little bit of a bias in the vector angle, the wedge angle.
Yeah, I want to talk a little bit about materials here. I'm seeing, pretty standard aluminum plates on the outside, but on the inside, I think I'm seeing some 3D printing.
Yeah.
Walk me through why these 3D printed plates on the inside.
Yeah, so the reason why we use 3D printed plates here is partially because of how much time we had, and so we try to make everything as modular as possible because we realize that iterating and making your dimensions very optimal is super essential to having a great intake. We've learned that throughout the season, and the reason why we have 3D printed plates here is that they don't take as much of an impact here, but the great thing about 3D printing is that the manufacturing time is a lot less and you're able to iterate it on a lot better. So this intake is actually able to come off with just 4 screws on the inside here. So based off of that, we're able to edit our dimensions and change things if we see necessary. For example, some of the things we needed were the compression overall and also the position of our back roller, as we have it so these noodles are the only ones holding the second ball. And as you know, we have a split transfer, so it's transfer separate, right? But our intake still has to spin after we intake the second ball to get the third one, so we don't want it to stall.
Yeah, last question about that 3D printing is, when you're making plates, you want to make sure they're strong. What advice do you have for teams in regards to like infill, walls, anything that just really made it, so much more consistent and robust?
For 3D printing, actually, we prioritize having more walls rather than infill because the amount of wall loops you actually have increases part strength more than if you just increase infill. So I would recommend having around 3 to 4 walls. 3 walls is probably good enough for most use cases, and just sticking to like 20 to 30% infill is all you need if you already have those 3 wall loops.
Before we get to our next segment, we'd like to thank the following. Build your alliance with so many other FIRST alumni who go to Kettering University. Every student at Kettering experiences their cutting-edge co-op programs that seamlessly blend the professional and academic worlds. Kettering co-ops are a fully immersive working experience at the leading edge of industry. Head on over to kettering.edu/first to learn more about their incredible programs and to get more information.
Yeah, let's now talk about the transfer. You mentioned the split transfer. So if you can show me where those motors are and what each one is powering, let's start with that.
So the intake motor is right here in our intake, but our transfer motor is in the back. So we kept both the motors low because we didn't want to be a tippy robot. At Worlds, we had our shooter motors high and our feeder motors, or transfer motors high as well. So we tipped a lot, but with this, both our motors are very low. So low center of gravity, we can move very fast without tipping. And then the decision behind the split was that we saw a lot of the best close-down teams do it, and we really did not want to have anything stall out and brown out the system. So we don't want the two high speed and high compression wheels here to cause an issue when we have only 1 ball or 2 balls. So basically we went with that, yeah.
That makes a ton of sense. Let's now talk about the transfer itself, what rollers you're running on either side. I think I see rollers on both sides of the transfer. So start with that and then I'll ask more questions.
Yeah, so for the intake, we use the Gecko wheels, and they go all the way up, and we actually have 3 stages of that. We also use Vex wheels. These are the gray ones that are slightly bigger in diameter. We use them on the edges because the balls are circles, and so they maintain better contact. For the transfer itself, we have a set of Gecko wheels, 48 millimeter on the front side, and then there's 2 sets of the Grip Force Gecko wheels on the back side. And we have the back side to basically minimize as much spin from the transfer as possible, because without counter rolls on the shooter, we want to have as much consistency as we can, and spin adds inconsistency to the shooting.
I want to ask about that gear train that you have going on with those counter rollers. Why go with the gears? Do you have any advice for teams as far as making sure they're smooth, or anything that you did that can help teams have a very efficient gear train in their own transfers?
So for the gear train in the back, we use the gears because we need to reverse the direction of the back transfer wheels because they need to spin in opposite directions on each side. And we just have 3 steel gears here, and then everything else is belted. And one of the things that we do to maintain high efficiency, especially at really high speeds like the transfer or the intake, is we actually increase the center to center of those gears from what the perfect center to center is, so that there's actually slightly less meshing, but because it's not high torque, it doesn't really ever skip, and that just allows us to be faster and more efficient.
Is that like 0.1 millimeters, 0.2 millimeters? Do you remember off the top of your
most
head?
of the, I think, for all the gears and all of the belts, we've shortened it by 0.2 millimeters center to center, so that it's a little bit looser. Or I guess the gears are expanded by 0.2, so there's more space.
Sure. Yeah, awesome. Let's talk a little bit about sensors in that intake transfer path. What sensors are you using throughout? And then we'll talk about how you're using them.
So we use the laser distance sensors. We chose this because for us, they were the easiest to tune because you didn't need to tune. Like, we used color sensors before on our old bot, and because those were mostly code oriented, like you had to tune all the distance thresholds and all the values in code, it was a lot harder to calibrate. But for these sensors, like us, like me or Havish, we don't need to be there to calibrate them. They calibrate them themselves, and these still work pretty well compared to color sensors because they're faster and they only need to read distance because we don't sort anymore.
Yeah, let's talk through that calibration process a little bit. What are you doing here? Is it like a test program you're running, or just walk our rookie teams through how do you calibrate these sensors consistently and very quickly?
So for these sensors, they actually have a LED inside. I don't know if you can see. When they're not detecting, they're red, but then when they do detect a ball, you can see that the light turns green, if you can see that there. And through that, you can easily calibrate. There's a potentiometer in there, and we just use a small flathead screwdriver to turn it. And once you have the good enough threshold, you can use your hand to test whether that threshold is large enough, then you can just use that in your runs.
Also, additionally, the Go Builder sensors we use here can switch between an analog and a digital mode. So right now we're using a digital mode because we don't actually need the readings of how far away the ball is. We just need to know that the ball is there. So the actual information that it sends back in our code is just that, is the ball there or not? It's just a yes or no.
Yeah, so now, yeah, perfect. You have that information, you know if the ball is there or not. What do you do with it? How does that change what your program does?
So for our teleop at least, because we have 3 sensors, right? We have one in the transfer, and this one's purely used so we can stop the transfer wheels so they don't rub off and wear. But the other 2 are purely just to detect how many balls you have. So for teleop, we just stop the intake if we have 3 balls to prevent an intaking of 4th ball. But for auto, we also use this for our close auto at least. We use it to leave the gate once we have enough. For our 27, that is whether you have 2 because we want to have faster cycles. For the 24, because we want a more consistent auto, we use all 3.
Oh wow! So you'll change between how many artifacts you choose to pick up in an auto depending on consistency versus like peak performance.
Yeah, because for a 27, we would generally run it with more high flow, like high ball flow alliance partners. So we just add a wait time after 2, so we don't have to wait for a 3rd one. And even if we don't get all 3, we can still cycle it for the for our alliance
that
partner.
makes a ton of sense. Let's jump into the shooter now. Have there been a lot of changes since your rebuild shooter, or since your original shooter, or is it mostly the same?
Yeah, so we started with no counter rollers at the very start of the season because it was simpler. But then for like a solid 6 months, we worked on counter rollers, but it was working well at Worlds because our fire rate was pretty slow. But the second we added this new transfer system, which was a lot faster, like shots started going everywhere, and then we decided like, no, we're not doing this. We don't have the time, we don't have like the energy really. And then we rebuilt a new shooter without counter rollers because we noticed that at most high level teams, they don't need the counter rollers because they just aim at the same spot, and then the backspin is not really a problem.
The artifacts like bounce against each other.
Right,
in the goal,
yeah,
right?
and
Okay,
they go in.
Yeah. Yeah, what I want to ask about here specifically is actually your like stopper, or your artifact stopper over here. It looks very interesting to me. Walk me through the mechanism, why you guys decided this.
Yeah, so what we did was we had an MGN here. The MGN just pulls the string to pull it out. Yeah, so the MGN pulls the string to pull it out, and then a bungee pulls it back in. The reason we decided to go with that was partially for like the love of the game. It was just a cool mechanism. We wanted to try it out. But other thing was like we don't want to have a big cut into our shooter plates for stability. So because with most blockers it flips in and out and it has to intersect. But like with here, there's already a gap, so we just like can slide right through.
Yeah, as far as like actuation time goes, how long does it take for this like gate to get out of the way?
Oh, we actuate it while moving, so it doesn't really matter.
Okay, and that's all also based off of those laser distance sensors to determine when to open it. I see. That makes a ton of sense. As far as software goes with the shooter, anything you guys are doing that just really levels up your consistency?
So for us, we know that like a lot of high level close zones do shoot on the move, and we tried that. But one thing we realized was because we run a servo turret, our turret can't actually keep up with just the continuous updates. So what we did was we basically projected our robot's position into the future, so our turret knows where to go before the robot's actually there, because we generally shoot at the same time at each cycle.
Okay, got it. Last thing I want to ask you guys about is like overall game strategy, how that's changed at MTI. You guys are running a lot of close zone. There's a lot of tough matches. What are some of the things that has just really leveled up your consistency in that close zone?
Yeah, so I think MTI is definitely a higher level competition. Early season at our league qualifiers or our state championships, we pretty much stuck to the same cycles every game, and we just tried to play our own game. But at MTI, you really need to work with partners, and you need to be able to be adaptable on the field. And so a couple things that we've changed, and especially even since Worlds, is one, that we try to be more open to going to other places on the field. Obviously, the gate cycle, especially for a close zone like us, is going to be the fastest cycle. But a lot of the times that's either defended, or there's no balls in the gate, or there's just more ideal balls to collect. So we've been trying to work on where we can look around the field, go to other places, maybe even come to our own human player zone where we can collect penalties on the other alliance. And then additionally, one of the things that MTI is starting to show is that a lot of the times double close is a viable strategy. And at Worlds, every single match we would run far with a close zone teammate, and that's just kind of how the alliance schedule went. And not a lot of people tried double close, but what we found is there's ways to work with either a close zone or a far zone. And since we're very optimized for close, but our far zones, especially teleop, is not as much, it's not as optimized. And so being able to still have good strategy with another really good close zone has helped us win a lot of matches at MTI.
Yeah, as far as practicing for that goes, how are you practicing for that? Like, do you have multiple robots on the field at home, or like, what are you doing in order to, emulate or simulate these tough situations?
Yeah, so at home we have a couple robots lying around. Mainly, one of them is a super old robot from Ultimate Goal, so we just have that driving around from the far zone trying to tag us in the zone. So we've been able to make decisions on whether to go and basically hide in our gate zone or to just tank the penalty and take intake from the gate. And one more thing with the practice is that one thing super important is the gate control, because every single time you open the gate, if you let the entire classifier go into the opponent's human player zone, the far zone will get as many balls as they want. So if the far zone is not like right next to you, which obviously you need to be able to tell, like predicting where they're going to be before you even cycle, you're able to actually maneuver in a way to block the balls from coming out of the gate as you leave. So based on that, we actually get a much quicker next cycle, because you don't need to go to the human player zone, you just go right next to the gate. And you also make the far zone have to move a lot more in order to shoot those balls.
Awesome. Yeah, RevAmped Robotics, thank you guys so much. You are just absolutely stellar at MTI every single season. This one is no exception. I can't wait to see how you guys do one more qualification match. I'm sure we'll have some really, really strong playoff matches as well. Reporting for Fun Robotics Network, I'm Abbas, and this is Team 12808, RevAmped Robotics. Thank you.
Thanks for watching. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and click the bell to stay up to date on future fun videos. Build your alliance with so many other FIRST alumni who go to Kettering University. Every student at Kettering experiences their cutting-edge co-op programs that seamlessly blend the professional and academic worlds. Kettering co-ops are a fully immersive working experience at the leading edge of industry. Head on over to kettering.edu/first to learn more about their incredible programs and to get more information. Studica Robotics is inspiring teams to build better robots with their new array of FTC team options. Check out their updated bevel gears and Maverick hex shaft motors, Planetary gearbox options, and 6mm hex components and shafts for extreme power transmission. Go to studica.com/robots to learn more and apply for discounts.